I'm lucky to have found a community where people can talk about paranormal things without writing every single thing off as crazy. So, let me tell you my story. I was born and raised in Louisiana. I lived in a normal neighborhood in a normal house with normal parents. My uncle, on the other hand, lived deep in the bayou. I'm talking the type of shit you see in movies, where there is a cabin on stilts with lamps hung outside in the middle of a fucking swamp. I did not even think they existed anymore when my parents took me over to my uncle's cabin for the first time. But here I was, right in front of it. I was about 8 years old at the time, and my uncle used to tell me stories about an old hag that lived deeper in the swamp. He told me stories about how she would come out every now and then to snatch people up who wandered too close to her territory and eat them. Now, my uncle was that special brand of asshole that liked to scare little kids half to death, so he would do things like this all the time. I was scared back then, but we took another trip out to see him when I was about 15. I had brought along my friend Tom, who needed a place to stay since his folks were abusive. Anyway, it was me, my mom, my dad, Tom, and my uncle. We would sit around this fire pit he had in his cabin where he used to tell me his scary stories, and he started back up telling us the story about the hag that he told me about when I was a kid. I remembered it and laughed to myself as my parents made comments like, "They're a bit old for that now, aren't they?" We spent our time there without incident until we were ready to leave, but me and Tom decided we wanted to stay over at my uncle's place for a little bit longer since we were having a blast over there. My parents begrudgingly agreed. There was a lot of crime going on under the heavy cover of the canopy of gnarled swamp trees, so my parents were naturally a little bit uneasy about it. But me and Tom stayed with my uncle, despite my parents' protests. Tom seemed interested in my uncle's story about the hag, much more than I was, so he asked him if he knew anything else about the story. My uncle, to my surprise, had more to say on the matter. He began explaining that the hag could be found if you walked down an old path through the swamp, but you could only reach it by boat. Then Tom had this crazy idea. He asked my uncle if he could take us on that path. I remember looking at my uncle, thinking he was about to break the news to Tom about his story being bullshit that was meant to scare him. But to my surprise, he said, "Sure, we will go tonight." I looked between the both of them. My uncle was smiling. He obviously had something even more devious planned for poor Tom. If only he knew. It was about 6 o'clock at night when we started getting ready to get going on our bullshit witch hunt. My uncle gave us each a backpack and loaded us up with survival gear. I had some reservations about camping out in the swamp, but my uncle was a crazy motherfucker. Once we were ready, my uncle grabbed his gun and we headed out. He got us into his boat and off we went. He guided the motor at the back of the boat while I sat next to him, Tom sitting near the middle of the boat, looking around at the surroundings that were dimly lit by a lamp on the front of the boat. I looked to my uncle and asked the inevitable questions. What did he have planned for Tom? Why was he going so far with the joke this time? My uncle just laughed and said, "You're gonna laugh your ass off." I am going to switch to shorter posts so as to break up the story into easier to swallow bites. We must have been boating for something like 10 minutes before we came to what looked like a dock. It was old and rickety, in much poorer condition than what I was used to. My uncle had picked one hell of a venue for all of this to go down at. At least, that is what I thought. We tied the boat to the dock and made our way onto a narrow path. Tom was excited. This must have appealed to some sort of fucked up sense of adventure in his twisted little head, but I was scared shitless, and I was not about to be the target of the most cruel practical joke on the planet. With Tom far enough ahead, I got to asking my uncle where he heard the story about the hag. It was way too detailed for him to have just made it up on the spot, to which he replied that he had heard it from an old babysitter that used to babysit him when he was a kid. He told me that there was a lot of history behind this part of the bayou, lots of murders and occult activity, but he was a relentless skeptic, so on we trudged down the increasingly narrow path. As we walked, I started getting uneasy. My uncle was too giddy with anticipation to focus on anything but naive Tom, practically skipping like a little girl right in front of us, but I was all too focused on our surroundings. The trees in this part of the swamp just looked wrong. They were twisted in ways that seemed unnatural, even for swamp flora, like they were growing on an uneven surface which had far too many rocks underneath. Their branches spewed out from the trunks to hang over us, like the trees themselves were hiding the ground here from the sun's gaze. As we walked further and further, my uncle stopped, as though something was wrong. He had a confused look on his face. He turned to look off to the right, scratching his head. He was looking towards a tree. He called out to Tom, "Hold up a sec," and we waited there for just a few minutes, looking confused towards my uncle. Save for my uncle's lamplight, which cast a dull orange glow on the trees that surrounded us, it was pitch black. It was a bad idea coming out here at night. I looked to my uncle and asked what was wrong. He spoke with a hint of worry in his voice. "We were supposed to meet a friend of mine here, but he must be up further ahead. Come on, boys, stay close now." He started walking forward. By now, I understood what my uncle had planned. He had probably told a friend to wait somewhere along the path in a costume to jump out and scare us. But the longer we walked, the more uneasy my uncle looked. The trees were definitely catching our attention now, either due to my uncle finally realizing something was wrong, or because the extent to which the trees around us had been warped was starting to look utterly alien. I had enough. I told my uncle we should turn back, because things were just getting plain spooky now, a suggestion which was met with approval between the three of us. We turned around to make our way back down the path, and there it was. Directly before us, dimly illuminated in the light of my uncle's lantern, was the most disgusting thing I had ever seen in my life. As my eyes met with the creature's form, I was suddenly overcome with a sense of crushing dread. The thing looked vaguely like a woman, but its proportions were all wrong. The woman, if you could call it that, stood before us, partly naked. Its wrinkled and aged form, draped with bits of dark cloth, which did not hide nearly enough of its grotesque form from my view. It was deathly thin, and its arms and legs were far too long to belong to anything meant to be on planet Earth. Its finger and toenails had grown to an obscene length, and a head of wild grey hair hung over the thing's visage. It was twitching in an unnatural way, as though it was having a seizure as it stood there. My uncle readied his gun, aiming it at the thing. His hands were trembling as he fired off a shot, but as the shot rang out, the thing was gone. I heard a blood-curdling scream come from my uncle, and then the sound of the lamp shattering. The thing was on top of him, its fetid claws tearing away my uncle's flesh as it tossed his rifle aside. I had not even seen it move. I ran in the direction we had come, not even bothering to look back towards Tom or my uncle or the thing. The light was gone, and I was running blind. Eventually, I had run far enough where I could see the light coming from the lantern on the boat that we were brought here in. I heard something running behind me and looked back. It was Tom, just barely visible from the light of the boat's lantern. We reached the boat and pulled the string to start the engine back up. It stalled a few times, but eventually it started up. We turned around and began speeding away on it. We looked back with just enough time to see it standing there on the top of the dock, dragging my uncle's lifeless body in tow. I don't know how we managed to find our way back to my uncle's cabin, but we did. We immediately called the police and then our parents. The cops arrived and we told them what had happened. Of course, none of them believed us, and neither did our parents. But something happened to my uncle. His body never turned up. but me and Tom, we know the truth. I moved to California shortly after that, but Tom is still living in Louisiana. He says he wants to go back. I'm starting to think he's got a death wish. I won't be joining him. A few years ago, my brother, who was wounded in Afghanistan and has issues with TBI and PTS, disappeared. He'd been having a rough time, dropped out of school, broke up with his girlfriend of 8 years, and had a habit of disappearing into the woods for impromptu camping trips for days at a time. Usually, he would say something beforehand, but this time, he left his car at my mom's place, left his computer in her kitchen with a YouTube music video about a veteran who kills himself, 5-finger death punches if I remember correctly, left his phone and guns, etc. Just plain disappeared. I got a call from my younger brother, then my mother, then the state troopers, while I was at the shooting range with my own unit. I was still in the service. I spent a week honestly believing he had killed himself. Then he showed up again like nothing happened. I've had weird shit happen to me in the woods and overseas, but nothing ever scared me like this. In my grade 8 days, I used to travel a bit. On a trip to an old fort in Canada, the guards took us on a ghost walk because we were staying the night and it would be spooky. Note, the guards telling the stories obviously hammed them up, just so the ghosts were to sound a lot more threatening than the real stories had made them out to be. The first story was kinda lame-ish, an old guard spirit claiming revenge after being killed by prisoners. The guards looked beyond out of it. But on the second story, the guards looked so goddamn uncomfortable. You could tell they hated this shit. They even stated that they hated this part of the tour, as children and babies cry without reason, and people would just ask to leave. Along with that, the guard that was to hold the lantern had their hands shaking visibly, constantly. They told us the story of an officer in the 19th century who had committed war crimes and was sentenced to death, but due to the lack of people sentenced to death in the area, the office was kept in the quarters in the fort until the hanging post was created at the town square. After this dude had been put to death, his spirit was supposed to reside in his quarters that he stayed in. The officer said that we had to guess the room in which he stayed. Note, each room was behind a glass wall, like the image above, and the only light we had was a lantern. So, we walked along the hall and stopped in each room along the way. If you felt a presence or a pressure that you did not in the previous rooms, you were to stay there, and the guards would return briefly. Each room felt so uncomfortable that even staring through the glass into the dim-lit rooms was enough to make people leave. We all stopped at the room we thought to be the most powerful. The majority had guessed right, and the crowd went dead silent. I practically shit myself then and there. Super fucking creepy. Still scares me to this day. This was many years ago when my friends and I were under the legal drinking age. I live in a rural area, so the solution to the youth dilemma has always been to throw a party outside, somewhere secluded. My friends and I decided to throw a party one night in a wooded area on a hill. There is one gravel road that goes up to a radio tower and several areas where the trees thin out, and there is enough of a clearing to start a fire and have 20 to 30 people comfortably drinking without being in the woods, but is secluded enough to not be visible from the road. And the gravel road is long enough going up the hill to have everyone park and not be visible from the road. In short, it is a place that you'd have to specifically check to know there is a party. Myself and 3 friends arrived first to collect wood, start the fire, tap the keg, etc. We drove 2 cars and parked. 2 of my friends were going to get the keg out of the car and set it up, while my buddy Phil and I collected firewood and started a fire. Phil and I walked further up the hill where the woods got denser and there was some dead, dried wood that would work best. As we scrounged for firewood, I felt like I was being watched. It was very dark at this point, and my eyes were pretty well adjusted to the darkness, but you still had to focus to see very far. Because of the uncomfortable feeling of being watched, I froze and started looking around and listening for any noises. I noticed that Phil had done the same. That is when I noticed it. About 15 to 20 feet in front of us was a creature on all fours. The best I can describe it is that it looked like a wolf, but about 9 feet long, and had glowing red eyes. Its shoulders must have been at least 3 feet wide, and it was thickly built. I was gone. Fight or flight kicked in, and it was all flight. I dropped the wood in my hands and ran down the hill as fast as I've ever run, with no thought of Phil at all. I ran right past the two friends and the keg, got in my car, and left as fast as I could. As I was starting my car, I saw Phil and the other two getting in the other car and doing the same. I went home that night, and Phil and I never talked about it again. Never is in quotes, because one night, about a decade later, we were sitting together in a bar, and I turned to him and said, "So, that night by the radio tower," and he said, "Yep." I continued, "That happened, right?" He answered, "Yep," uncomfortably making it clear that that was the end of the conversation. In a life well lived and a list of scary shit, this is the scariest moment. Nothing else even comes close. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you do and you want to hear more, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below, as it lets the algorithm know that you like my content and it promotes it to more people. My goal for the channel is to hit 50,000 subscribers, and we're closing in fast, so thank you, and back to the stories. This is my first time on this board, and I will tell 2 true stories that happened to me, as they are the scariest things that happened to me. Believe them or don't, I just want to get them off of my chest. Story 1. When I was young, I attended a daycare center, as both of my parents worked during the day, and there was no one to watch me as a kid. The daycare center often took us on field trips during the summer, and it was very fun. We went to a swimming pool. I did not know how to swim well, but I thought I did. I saw my friends and all the cool kids swimming in the deep end and wanted to join. I quickly realized that I did not know how to swim at all and started drowning. I fell to the bottom of the 12 feet deep pool and felt no pain. Suddenly, I felt an unknown force grab me by my armpits and hoist me up. I kept being pulled up, crying for help, but no lifeguard on duty. I fell back down. I saw the shadow of what looked like an angel to me because it had large wings pull me back up. There was no one behind me, but I felt like something very strong was pulling me up and pushing me to the edge off the pool. Finally, a teacher comes along and grabs my hand and helps me up. There is no lifeguard and no other kid in the deep end of the pool. Nobody was there. Story 2. When I was in 6th grade, I attended a field trip where students went to a kick camp for a week. We engaged in fun team-oriented games like kickball, relay races, Jeopardy-style games where we had to prove we were smarter than the other students, etc. Lots of fun. This took place on an island. On the last day, we were split into 2 groups, boys versus girls. These groups were then split into smaller groups of 4. The game, a very elaborate Easter egg hunt. Instead of looking for eggs, we were given treasure maps. Each item we had to find was located on the map, but the item itself was a mystery. We had to figure out what the riddle was in order to know what the item was and where to find it. We overanalyzed the last item and went off the reservation. We discovered a house on the island that was burned down, but explored it. We saw a treasure chest, but it was out of our reach, and one of our guys in my group almost died trying to get it because the floor from under him gave way. He ran back to us just in time. We left the house and heard voices. We stumbled on a construction crew. They were building what looked like another campsite that looked like ours. A bunch of small cabins, obviously for students, large office buildings, recreational buildings that most likely had a gym inside it. At the center of it all was a giant ditch. It was massive. We tried to get closer to see what was in it because nobody heard us or paid any attention our way, as they were all too deep into their work and it was very loud as they were cutting down trees. We saw a dead construction worker in the ditch. People with red helmets lying on the ground with no life in them. They were burying them in the ditch. We freaked out. I told them I'm fucking out of here and ran. Hey, Somebody get those kids. We ran and never looked back. We hid in the burned down house for an hour. We did not see anything but heard footsteps for a few minutes. We made it back to camp and realized the final item on the map was on the beach near the boats and never had to leave the area to find it. The prize was a fucking basketball and a gift card. The guys in my group were not friends with me and we hated each other, but this scared the shit out of us and we never talked about it to anybody and did not talk to each other after that. I got one. I usually fought with my dad, and no matter what time it was, I would go out and just go on the road, and once usual things happened, me and Dad fought. I left the house and hit the road. It was around 9 p.m. when I left. I kept on driving until I realized, where the fuck am I? I was on a dirt road. I drove for a few more kilometers and I saw this little Assyrian village. The village itself was spooky, in middle of a valley, old house, quiet as fuck. Usually you hear dogs barking and stuff, but this one was quiet. I had no idea where I was stopped for a few minutes, and this old lady showed up. A tall lady with fair skin and dark hair in her 60s, and she wore a long white dress. And it's around midnight to 1 a.m. Not usual for someone to be out at this time. I decided to ask her for directions. I did not come out of the car, just drove a little closer to her and rolled the window down. And I asked her in Turkish about direction. I'm from Turkey. She was looking back at me the whole time, like observing me from my forehead to my neck. When I asked her, she just shook her head and said nothing. I asked in Kurdish, since it was a Kurdish area, and she again shook her head. After a small pause, she said in a very calm, soothing voice, "Do you speak Arabic?" I learned Arabic from working in a Syrian shop, and I said yes, and I said yes, and I asked for directions, and in a very spooky, calm voice, she said, "Go straight forward." I thanked her, and she started acting weird, like some sort of cat. She stuck her teeth out and moved her hands like a paw. It was so scary. I still remember her white teeth, and she kept on doing that as long as she was visible to me. I looked at her in the mirror, and she was still doing that. She did something like in the pic, and the road was a dead end. Nothing was there. I turned around, and the lady was not there anymore. It still haunts me to this day. Bro, I think I shitted ectoplasm. I was eating Taco Bell and looking at tarot cards online when I started feeling spooked and my stomach started hurting. I think I became possessed because I felt compelled to run to the bathroom. The forces moving made me rip my shorts off and jump onto the toilet feet first, squatting onto it, something I've never done before, but I assumed the position like an acrobat. Something else started as my ass hovered there over the toilet. I could see my stomach muscles spazzing, and the insides of me started rumbling in a low pitch that sounded like voices, dark voices, Fearum, Shraitan. Then it clicked to me what must be going on. Obviously, a demon was taking over my body because it had to take a shit and was trying to use me to do it. At that moment, something tapped the bathroom door, and this spooked my asthma out of me. It was my dog, scratching at the door, whimpering. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. I was frozen there. Shraitan. Guys, I was shaking. But then, suddenly, squatting there, my chakras aligned. It would hurt, but I knew I had to remove the demon. It must have been a large entity, maybe an Oni demon. I could feel its anger. It left my body in one swift motion, and I thought I heard laughing, but I began to pass out. Everything stopped turning white for a moment, and I found myself sitting there, able to move again. I was too afraid and ashamed to look down, but I could see beneath me, and the bowl was a shadowy dark I have never seen before. It was blacker than black, and the closer I looked into it, the darker it all got. All I could do was reach for the roll and try to run, but then another peculiar thing happened. The toilet paper holder began to slowly spin on the wall, completely, until it was no longer dispensing from the bottom, but from the top. And then the bathroom door opened by itself, with nobody there. I don't know why this happened, and for the last week, I have been avoiding going online or to the bathroom. But still, ever since my ass stopped hurting, my luck has turned around. Perfectly normal story? Norrköping, Swedish East Coast, July 20th, 1972. The witness was a 19-year-old girl named Gun Johnson, who... Sorry. I'm a child. Who had been on a road trip to Switzerland with her older sister and her husband and children. When they returned to Sweden, they drove the 19-year-old home, who was still living with her parents. The mother and father and the other younger sisters wanted to know how they had enjoyed their vacation, so they stayed up late at night and talked. Everyone went to bed very late. The 19-year-old shared a room with a sister who was a few years younger, who fell asleep very quickly when they went to bed. Gun was still up and had trouble sleeping. She was awake half the night, and it was only when it started to get light outside around 4 in the morning that Gun was about to fall asleep. And that is when she felt like she was not getting any air. She jerked and woke up, and noticed that it wasn't the blanket or the pillow that was blocking her mouth and nose. She thought she had just imagined it. Gun fell back asleep, but woke up again because the air felt heavy to breathe again. Now she noticed that she could not move normally either, and every movement was a great effort. She was terrified and tried to scream, but she could not. She thought she might have died, but with great effort, she rolled off the bed and slowly crawled towards her little sister, who was sleeping in her bed 3 meters away. When she was halfway across the floor, she looked towards the door. Then she saw a small, ugly green creature looking at her. She had never been more surprised and scared in her entire life. It was only 1 meter tall, with broad shoulders, short legs, and short arms with clawed hands. It also had a large, triangular head with wide eyes. The ugly green creature stood there by the door and smiled at her with its big mouth. But then, suddenly, she was lying there in her bed again and could move as usual, and then she fell asleep almost immediately. Gun tried to forget the horrible thing that had happened, and 2 years passed. But then, one night, she was put into the same coma-like state again, and then a few months passed, and it happened again, but she never saw the little creature again. A few months after the first incident, she got an itchy spot on her belly button about the size of a coin. The rash then started to spread to her arms, back, stomach, and neck, and the worst was 6 months later, when she sometimes had to scratch so much that it bled. Gun went to the doctor and was given tablets and an ointment for the rash. This did not help. After a while, she visited a homeopath and he prescribed tablets with sulfur and calcium carbide. This helped, and all of the eczema disappeared except for the one on her stomach. Okay, here is some OC. I like reading stuff about cryptids, but don't buy into all this supernatural stuff. This story is my mother's, and to be honest, I have always believed it, albeit I still don't consider it supernatural. Be my mother, 20s, working as a nurse in Wales. There are 2 kids, an infant boy and girl, between 6 and 9, sorry, can't remember exactly. Both have cystic fibrosis or something like that, terminal. My mom is really fond of kids and has a soft spot for the little girl. For the months she's been there, they get close and talk a lot. X months later, little boy dies. One day, not long after my mom gets off a shift in the evening, goes home, does whatever, and goes to bed. Dreams of a black background with the little girl standing there. She says something along the lines of, "I wanted to say goodbye and thank you, and I don't want you to be sad. Boy's name and I can run and play now, which we could never do before, so please don't be sad." Dream over. My mom instantly wakes up. Time is like midnight or something. Mom gets dressed, drives to the hospital, goes to the nurse on duty at the desk, and asks to see little girl. Nurse looks at her like she's crazy. Little girl went into cardiac arrest at midnight and died. Basically, that's it. Now, my mom has told me this story many times when I was younger, But recently, we were looking for photos of me as a kid for my fiance to see, and we stumbled across an old photo of my mom, another nurse, and the two kids, and she told my fiance the story. I, of course, already knew it, but I got this very strong feeling from looking at the kids. Looking at the little boy made me feel like there was a lot I did not know, like I had many things to learn, and looking at the little girl made me feel like everything was okay, and I could be very happy. I can't find the picture now, but I could possibly find it in the morning and post it in another thread.